Tonight our talk is on the sacred body, which is kind of a shorthand for spiritual, the understanding of the body that come from different spiritual traditions. Traditionally in the West, the body has been considered kind of a profane, gross, coarse, almost defiling thing. In Asia, especially the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, the body is considered a repository for sacred energies, forces, dynamics that are at work in the course of spiritual practice. So that working with your body can actually be a way to come closer to God, so to speak, or perhaps in Buddhist enlightenment or whatever the end goal is taken as being. And I just would like to start by saying that I'm in agreement with the Asian traditions and in disagreement with some of the Western traditions. The body is not coarse, crude, a source of sin or anything like that. The first kind of work on the body that I'll be thinking of is the Kundalini traditions, in which there are 7 chakras. According to some traditions, the chakras run through the body, front to back, and are not just locations on the surface. It's true that there are ganglia, collections of bundles of nerves in the locations for the chakras, but these, like other ganglia throughout the body, are controlled by the brain, so that ultimately, even if you say there are ganglia located at the third eye, the throat chakra, and so forth, you haven't really addressed the question of the brain's role. And ultimately, we have to get back to the brain that all of these ganglia are connected to in order to get real answers to the questions about the brain's role in all of this. And of course, whether the body is considered sacred or profane, it is ultimately controlled by the brain. The first chakra is the root chakra, also called the Muladhara chakra. And that word Muladhara just means the root place. And every one of the chakras has a group of associations that go with it that don't actually make a lot of, don't bring a lot of clarity in it, at least for me. The root chakra, for example, is associated with the god Ganesh, another god called Indra. It has an element, earth, and its animal is an elephant with 7 trunks. Now, traditionally, the function of the root chakra is to act as a reservoir for all the other chakras that are located above it. The next chakra is called the Swadhisthana chakra, a word that means one's own abode. And in the West, it's come to be called the sex chakra. It has some deities, the most important of which is Vishnu. Its element is water, and its sort of totem animal is the crocodile. Its function appears to be reproduction. And the next chakra, this is kind of a brief overview of the traditional view, is the Manipura chakra, the 3rd chakra. In Chinese, it's known as the Tan Tien, the center of heaven. In Japan, it's known as the Hara, the place where you cut if you performed harakiri, or seppuku. And in fact, the phrase harakiri just means destruction of the hara. So that in that culture, there's a kind of conception that the hara, the 3rd chakra, is where you actually live, which is echoed in the meaning of the Sanskrit word, one's abode. The next chakra is the Anahata, that's the heart chakra. Anahata is a Sanskrit word that means not hit. Ana is not, and hata is to hit. Its deity is the Vayu, the lord of the wind, and its element is air. Its animal is the antelope, and its obvious function is love. But when we're thinking of these things in more biological terms, what we end up with is a function that's, we can give the name bonding to. The next chakra is the Visuddhi chakra, a word that means purification, the throat chakra. It's got deities as well. Its element is space, ether, and its function, whether we're talking English or Sanskrit, is communication. The next one is the Ajna chakra, the 3rd eye. Its deity is pretty interesting. It's Andhara Ishwara Shiva, the Shiva that is half male and half female. And the idea appears to be that a kind of duality is being overcome, but it's not the duality of perceiver and perceived, matter and energy. It's not about overcoming the classical Western dualism of subject and object. It's more about overcoming more this worldly dualism. And its function is perception. The next one is the Sahasrara chakra, a phrase that means thousand-petaled lotus. And it only has one function in the traditions: enlightenment, or union with God. And so there's a quick overview of the traditions. Now, to begin with, in order to turn this kind of information into something that brain science can work with, we have to redefine Kundalini. Kundalini appears to be a biological system. And if it actually exists, then it would constitute a system that exists inside the body, an internal system, just like the endocrine system, the cardiovascular system, in this case, the lymph system. It's not reasonable to think that there could be an internal body system concerned with such overwhelmingly primal functions as reproduction, bonding, communication, and so forth, and to think that it has nothing to do with anything except spirituality. It should have some support to offer for biological survival. And just like any other system, it should have appeared as a result of our evolutionary history. And I think that the functions of the chakras are so basic that they probably had to have appeared long before our species appeared. That we are not the only species that communicates, that bonds, that reproduces, and so forth. And these features are things we share in common with actually reptiles, which arose in the Permian period. This is a system that appeared around the same time or even before the age of the dinosaurs. So we're talking about a very ancient system. This system contributed to our biological survival. And the Kundalini system is actually quite complicated. And at this point, I think I will introduce my basic concept here, what the Kundalini system does. It refers information from our brains to our bodies. Again, information in the brain to the body. The brain can't feel anything directly. It has no pain receptors. It has no nerve endings that can distinguish touch, pleasure, or anything like that. If you have something wrong in your brain, if you have an actual brain tumor, you can find that the tumor can grow to be enormously large, larger than in other areas of the body, without the patient feeling any pain at all. There's just no nerve receptors in there to experience the pain. So what I think is happening, here is an example of what I'm talking about. A heart attack will actually affect your heart, but your heart has no nerve endings or receptors to pick up physical pain either. So the pain is referred to areas around it. If you have a heart attack, you can have pain running down your arm. You can find it in your shoulder, in your armpit, and so forth. The pain is referred from the area that's having the problem to other areas that do have the nerve endings and then the receptors to tell you that there's something wrong. So what I think is happening is that information originates in the brain and is referred to the body where we can experience it, and then looped back to the brain through other channels so that we can then be conscious of our own emotional states. So if this is valid and the Kundalini system is actually a biological system, and it does go back as far as all that, as I said before, and it functions for biological survival, then there's got to be experiences that originate through the Kundalini system that we can experience in our own ordinary lives. So we're going to take another quick run through the chakras, looking at what they do. I should make the point that the kinds of experiences that I'll be talking about are ones that come up in fairly extreme moments. The common, ordinary moments of our experience would leave the Kundalini system quiet. If your heart chakra is open and you're feeling love, you don't want to be aware of your heart, your energy heart, your Kundalini heart. You want to be aware of your beloved. If the third eye does perception, you don't want to be aware of the spot between your eyebrows. You want to be focused on the object of your perception. So the Kundalini system, through most of our lives, will work best when we're aware of it the least. So the moments when we are aware of it are usually going to be fairly extreme and intense moments. So I'll begin with the two that don't quite fit the model. One of them is the chakra on the top of the head, the crown chakra, the one that only functions for enlightenment, and the other is the one at the very bottom of the whole system, the base chakra. And we're going to look at those at the end. After we've been through the other chakras, we'll be able to come back to these and see something about how they might perform. So let's begin again. Here we're talking about the second chakra, the Swadhisthana chakra, the sex chakra. Now, what most people experience from this chakra would appear to be sexual sensations. Most importantly, the moment of orgasm. Now, our genitals are fully wired for perception. We feel what's going on there very easily and very clearly, right up until the moment of orgasm, where the experiences, the perceptions that we're having actually no longer localize to the genitals. There's a great deal more going on, and all of it pleasurable, that happens during orgasm that allows us to, to enjoy the experience far more than the small bundles of nerve endings would permit, and at the same time makes it almost a whole body experience. So that's an extreme moment, and in that moment, if you're aware and perceptive, you can feel that there's a great deal going on that has nothing to do with your genitals at all. This is the sex chakra at work, at least as near as I can tell. The next one is the Hara, the Manipura chakra, the third chakra. And this one comes to us in our ordinary experience in an intense moment when we feel fear in the pit of our stomach. And that sensation doesn't really come anywhere else. And there's almost invariably a cold feeling that comes along with fear in the pit of the stomach. The third chakra is also the place where in martial arts we're encouraged to put our attention to minimize the experience of fear. Again, the Kundalini chakra system works best when it's commanding our attention least of all. Now, if what the third chakra does is self-defense, fear, and protection, and we put our attention there, we're going to short-circuit its ability to produce the experience of fear. If you let go into fear, you may have a sensation in the pit of your stomach, but you might not notice it. So if you put your attention there, that will short-circuit the mechanisms of fear. So if you're actually involved in a fight, the way martial artists are, you can find that your ability to feel fear goes down a great deal, and you become much more effective as a fighter. So here we have an illustration of a samurai, and the caption reads, "Sukiyaki Yokohama sashimi, please." So the next chakra for us to look at is the heart chakra. And the most common experience in the heart chakra in our ordinary normal lives is the sensation of a broken heart, that dull ache that comes in the center of our chest when we feel severe emotional pain. That's about the only sensation, that's about the only experience I've ever had there, though I know there are people who experience the opposite when they get some good news. Before I came here, while I was doing some research for tonight's talk, I looked up the sensation of a broken heart on a couple of medical websites. And believe it or not, I wasn't able to find anything in English. It was all in Swedish, Spanish, and so forth. There was almost no research published on the subject in English. And I was a little surprised because it is an extremely common somatic experience to have something bad happen and then have a pain come in the center of your chest. Actually, ache is a better word. And that seems quite strange to me. Hopefully, when I get some of this material published, it will inspire some people to go and look into that experience a bit more. So, for the next slide, here we have the throat chakra. And again, the sensation that comes up there for most people who've experienced anything at all is the sensation of being all choked up in response to grief. You can find yourself literally so grieved when bad news comes that you're unable to speak. In some extreme moments, words stop. Now, in the traditional Kundalini theory, this might be interpreted as a blockage or an extreme opening of the throat chakra. The next one is the third eye, and this is the place between the eyes and traditionally just a bit back. So it's actually located just inside your skull. There are people who feel pressure there once in a while without it being a headache or anything painful like that. And there's a simple exercise that I've found that can help people simply access the third eye without making anything extremely dramatic or spiritual happen. So if you can, everyone, I'm going to ask you now to put down your things and close your eyes, except the people who are working here. So what I want to ask you to do is close your eyes and cover your eyes with your hands enough that you block out the light from the room. Now, I'm going to ask you to focus your gaze straight on in the middle of your visual field, but pay attention to the top of your field without moving, without pointing your eyes to the top. So what you're doing is separating your attention from your physical vision. And now I'm going to ask you all to do the same thing again, except this time, keeping your eyes focused at your eyes pointed at the center of your visual field, move your attention to the bottom of your visual field. And that's it. You can all come back now. Any of you who got anything at all should have noticed a slight difference in the texture or the sense of the moment when you had your attention to the top as opposed to your attention to the bottom. But did anyone here experience anything at all, however subtle? A few nods. That which you experience there, which I won't attempt to characterize in words, is activity in the third eye. It's not, it doesn't come in the classical categories of third eye activity. It wasn't a psychic perception. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't, well, anything like that. It was simply kind of raw third eye output. Now, the other thing worth mentioning about the third eye is that another place, again, it's an extreme moment, although this one isn't emotionally charged. When you're actually falling asleep, a lot of people get inner imagery. They will find that faces, landscapes, little images of different sort, cartoonish images will just appear there quite spontaneously as they're drifting off to sleep. Usually it seems to have no particular meaning. They're just pretty or interesting in some way or another, but they don't seem to throw a lot of information at you, things you need to learn, or convey a sense that if you had an image of Donald Duck flashing through your mind, that you need to be learning from Donald Duck at this moment. It's kind of random. And that is also a category of experience that I would put into sort of raw third eye output. The reason it fits the category of extreme is that when you're giving up being awake and going to sleep, you're at a juncture between two radically different states of consciousness. And the transition from one to the other does constitute a kind of extreme shift in state of consciousness. One of the things that comes up with discussions about the third eye very often is the pineal gland. Does anyone want me to cover that? I'm getting nods of yes. Okay. There is the pineal gland. It's located about dead center in the brain. And traditionally it's been thought that the pineal gland is sort of the center of consciousness. And when I say traditionally, I mean Western mystic tradition. In fact, what it does is help our brains get through daily cycles, especially producing melatonin that facilitates sleep at the end of the day. About 95% of the cells in the pineal gland are called pinealocytes, and all they do is produce melatonin. 95% of this magical, mystical structure just produces chemicals that help us sleep. And I don't think that really lives up to its reputation. It was thought to be the seat of consciousness. Now we know that there isn't a seat of consciousness. Consciousness is widely distributed throughout the brain. There is a seat of not being unconscious. It's called the reticular formation, and it's in the brain stem, kind of lower down in the brain. And if you have Damage to the reticular formation, you can find yourself unconscious and unable to return to normal consciousness. If that one works, you go through unconsciousness in dreamless sleep and you come back. You go out again, you come back, no problem. If that one is damaged, you can find yourself unconscious and never return to consciousness. And of course, this is the source of many comas from which the patients never recovered. We don't have a seat of consciousness. We do have a seat of not being unconscious. And the whole idea of the pineal gland came from a philosopher, René Descartes, who is best known for having said, "Cognito ergo sum." I think, therefore I am. And here, the next slide shows us an illustration from his book, The Essay on Man. And that's where he published the notion that the pineal gland might be the center of consciousness. Now, in René Descartes' time, and this was published, I looked around, I couldn't find the exact date of publication, but it appears to be not far from 1625. That is coming close to 400 years ago. And my final comment about the pineal gland is that very few ideas from the early 17th century scientists actually turned out to be valid up to the present day. And the heavy-duty emphasis on the pineal gland as the seat for consciousness is no exception. The idea that the pineal gland is the center of our psychic or more subtle perceptions or the seat of consciousness is, to me, well, nonsense. And I know that that's a heavy-handed word to use, especially for a man so germane to Western philosopher as Descartes, but, well, that's the bad news. The evidence simply does not support the claim. And I'll be the first to admit that I'm going to be making a few claims tonight for which the evidence is pretty thin. But then this is the first union of the spiritual traditions of Asia with modern science focusing on the body, and we don't expect that the first time a theory appears, it's going to be able to cover all the ground. And as I found out recently trying to tidy up this presentation, a great deal of the concepts that need to be engaged in order to look at this simply haven't been investigated at all, or at least not in English. So time will tell, and hopefully we'll get more better later on. So here we are again at the base and the crown chakras, and these aren't involved in any common extreme experiences or mood. There may be a basis for them, but there's none that I could find. One interesting thing about both of them is that both of them are outside of words. Any experience you can have in perception, communication, bonding, sex, fear, self-protection can be expressed in words one way or another. Both of these traditionally accepted chakras seem to go beyond words. The crown chakra is about enlightenment, an experience that cannot be put into words. The root chakra is supposed to be a reservoir for the energy that feeds the rest of them, and it is prior to words. So we got beyond words and we've got prior to words. And I'll be getting back to the root chakra a little bit later on. So this is the limbic system, not the schematic that you have in front of you, which will be our next slide, but simply an overview of all kinds of structures, many of which have nothing to do with what we're doing here. But the complexity of the system is what's being illustrated here. And I believe that the chakras are a system that externalizes limbic functions, emotional functions, cognitive functions, somatic body, the functions that relate to our perception of our bodies. And these externalize them to the body. Now, the very different chakra functions suggest that they're going to involve different parts of the limbic system. There won't be any single brain part that corresponds to the chakras. Rather, we've got different brain parts corresponding to different chakras. So let's have a look at the schematic drawing that some of you have here as a handout. The first thing to say is that all neural correlations with the chakras are approximate, and they suggest the dominant structures, the most important structures in the different processes, not the entire picture. And dominant means that it's the one whose activity colors, shapes, lends texture or tone to the overall experience that the chakra is creating. So let's have a quick look at the screen here. The amygdala on the left is specialized for positive emotions, the one on the right for negative emotions. Fear and depression on the right, joy and bliss, and actually it's not on the screen there, but anger would also belong there. The hippocampus on the right does silent, nonverbal thinking, as for example, tones, harmonies, counterpoint and rhythm for a musician, tastes and textures for a cook, palettes and colors for an artist. There's all kinds of thinking that we do that doesn't involve words. The hippocampus on the right is also heavily involved in spatial perception, and our inner maps for how to get from our bedroom to our bathroom without having to actually think it through is very much a matter of right hippocampal function. The hippocampus on the left thinks in words, processes words in the course of its cognitions, puts words into context. The hippocampus has been called the contextualization engine. It takes nearly any perception that comes up and puts it into context. The caudate nucleus is the other one, and on the right side, it seems to be involved in relaxation. On the left side, it seems to be involved in arousal, though the more time I spend learning about the caudate nucleus and the things that it does, the more I'm convinced that this one is less specialized left to right. It shares information between its left and right counterparts quite readily, or perhaps has some of its left hemispheric functions redundant in the one on the right, and vice versa. I'll show you where the caudate nucleus is here. You can see it on the screen, the flashing green. It's partly hidden away by that big button structure in the middle called the thalamus. The main thing that the caudate nucleus does is it integrates our body's state of relaxation or tension with our emotional state. Some emotions, like anger, cause for tension and arousal. Others, like depression, call for our bodies to be relaxed and sort of limp even. And I have an exercise for you. It'll just take a minute. And I'm going to ask you all to sort of free your hands and sit more or less upright. In fact, the more upright, the better for this one. We want your spines vertical as much as we can get them. So I'm going to show you what you visualize here. What I want you to do is mentally divide your body down the midline. You know, your nose, middle of your mouth, your throat, your navel, and so forth. And I want you to be aware of, now close your eyes, thank you. What I want you to do is be aware of what the right side of your body feels like. Just focus your attention on the inside of the right side of your body. Sort of be aware of its texture, its color, its timbre, something like that. And now, I want you to switch your attention to the left side of your body and be aware of its inner landscape, its, I want to use the word milieu, although it's not actually the right word. That's it. You can all come back now. Were you aware of a difference between the inner texture of the left and the right side of your body when you divided it that way? That difference between the two is actually, I believe, your caudate nucleus at work. What you felt on the right side of your body had to do with the right caudate nucleus. What you felt on the left side of your body had to do with the left caudate nucleus. If those same structures had been firing away intensely through natural means, then it would be switched. Then right side would monitor or work with the left side of the body and vice versa. But at the level of simple imagination, at the level where you're pretending things about your body, then it's left to left and right to right. Now, you can use that. That's actually a worthwhile inner tool. you can take the side of your body that felt the most pleasant to you and sort of focus your attention there, and then using your breath as though it were a pump, sort of push that energy, that presence into the other side of your body so that it fills your entire body. And you can find that uncomfortable body moments that relate to things that you might call energy can be quickly healed over that way. So that is sort of one of my answers to the sacred body models of the East. There's a lot going on there. And yet, in everything I've read about Kundalini, chakras, chi, mana, prana, ki, and the yoga traditions, no one has ever designated the left and right side of the body as worthy of separate and independent attention. The guiding model for thinking about the body in Asia is that the high is sacred and the lower parts are somehow profane. So that in certain areas of Asia, one of the worst offenses you can commit is to actually touch someone's head with your foot. High is holy, bottom is not. And there's very little discussion about left and right. So we're going to have another look through the chakras once more, this time using the diagrams that you've got in front of you. The first one is the sex chakra, the Swadhisthana chakra, one's true abode. And whoever said that the sex chakra was the true abode, well, they described me. So, which brain structures are involved in the sex chakra? And it appears to be the hippocampus on the left and the caudate nucleus on the left. The reason that the hippocampus is implicated here is partly because mating rituals in human beings involve a good deal of talk, and also because the amygdala, which works in an alternate arrangement with the hippocampus, is deactivated during sexual arousal and orgasm. In order to have sexual arousal or orgasm, you have to have the amygdala quiet, and that immediately implicates the hippocampus as a dominant structure in this. The other is the caudate nucleus and its role in arousal. So this looks to me, these two brain parts look like the sex chakra, and their simultaneous activation would initiate the sex chakra in a way that would be classically recognized by the Kundalini tradition. The next slide is the third chakra, the Manipura chakra, the one that I think is involved in fear and self-defense and so forth. It looks like that is the right amygdala, one that's crucial in the experience of fear, as well as the right caudate nucleus. And the right caudate nucleus is implicated here, partly because in spite of its role in relaxation, the fight or flight mechanism is one that comes up and would involve considerable arousal. But in fact, what I think is going on is that the right caudate nucleus keeps things quiet in moments when we don't have reason to be afraid. If this is a biological system that's actively working all the time, like our respiratory system, our endocrine system, our lymphatic system, and so forth, it's got to have a job to do in all the moments when we're not sexually aroused. And although many people regret it, most moments are not moments of sexual arousal. So what's the sex chakra doing then? So its main job is keeping our fear levels appropriate to normal circumstances. And in most normal circumstances, there is, just like the spiritual teachers tell us, really nothing to be afraid of. So there we have the third chakra, the hara, the fear center. Let's move on to the next one, the heart chakra. The two crucial limbic structures, and each one of these has two limbic structures, is the left amygdala, which is a pleasant structure when it's activated. It seems to be involved in social interactions. The amygdalas overall recognize the meaning of other people's facial expressions. It's very emotional, it's very social, And it's also, according to a couple of reports I've had where people stimulated their brains with a magnetic signal derived from the amygdala, involved in the experience of love. The caudate nucleus on the left is better understood in its role. The caudate nucleus is instrumental in the experience of romantic love. It's also important for men in sexual arousal. And this kind of information put together implicates these two brain parts. Each one of these chakra limbic counterparts is two brain structures, not one. And all of them are either on one side of the brain or the other. And I'll be getting back to that theme in just a few minutes. This is the fifth chakra, the Visuddhi chakra, the purification chakra, the throat chakra. Its two brain parts appear to be the left amygdala, again because of its social work, its social role relating to other people. It's on the left where the language centers are. And the left hippocampus, which helps us to think and assemble our words into meaningful phrases and sentences with grammar and syntax and so forth. So there is the fifth chakra, as near as I can tell. The sixth chakra, the Ajna chakra, the third eye, implicates the right hippocampus because of its role in inner imaging and nonverbal perception and communication, and the right caudate nucleus with its role in relaxing the body. Anyone who works with psychic perceptions will tell you that in order to have the work come up, in order to have the work succeed, the images come up, you need your body to be relaxed. You can't do good psychic work. It doesn't matter how good a psychic you are. Doing sound psychic work when your body is in a state of arousal, sexual arousal, angry arousal, fearful, running away from something arousal, that will all preclude psychic perceptions from coming through. So these two structures look like the best, the most strongly implicated structures in the experience of psychic perception and anything else that traditionally has gone into the basket of third eye phenomena. Nearly anything that traditionally the pineal gland with its role in psychic perceptions, or its presumed role in psychic perceptions, actually turns out to involve the hippocampus on some level or other. The seventh chakra, now we're at the crown chakra. This is the one at the top, the one that functions only for enlightenment and union with God. This is the first time we get a chakra limbic counterpart, a brain counterpart, that involves a structure on the left and a structure on the right. The amygdala on the left is specialized for positive emotions, including things like joy and bliss, and these are components of enlightenment in every tradition that upholds it, or of union with God in every tradition that upholds it. If you have the unio mystica, if you finally, through the power of your prayers, meet God and you're connected to him, her, or it, face to face, you are in bliss. You experience total trust. Everything is fine. Everything is so fine that I can't even get it into words. And people who've had meetings with God in near-death experiences have commonly said, I can tell you what I felt, but words won't convey it. The Buddha said, I can tell you where I am, but words don't do it. The Tao that can be spoken is not the real Tao, and those are very hard words for a man giving a lecture. So, as far as the root chakra is concerned, the one at the other end, this is the only structure that seems to fit the bill for supporting the other chakras, which for us must needs mean supporting structures in the limbic system is the thalamus, the structure that actually takes input from our emotions, our thoughts, and all of our senses and packages them into a single unitary whole that we can apprehend as ourselves, including our ability to break ourselves down into perception, thought, and emotion. And yet what it seems to be a reservoir of is not the energy that keeps the limbic system going, but rather it's a reservoir of information. Not raw electrical energy that keeps the brain going, not spiritual energy that informs the chakras, but rather the information that keeps them going. When you're in fear and your right amygdala gets turned on, how do you know that you're in fear? Something has put your capacity for fear together with your perception of a fearful object and turn them into a unitary whole that gets you responding adaptively to that threat, whatever it may be. So where does this all come together? Where's the root for all of the limbic system's activity? The root is in the thalamus. Again, the chakra concepts are based on spiritual experiences, not common ordinary experiences. The theory was apparently developed in order to account for certain extraordinary states of consciousness that people got through spiritual practice, where my starting point for the chakras has to be a biological system. So the model for the chakras has to account for common ordinary stuff as well as the exceptional stuff. This is where the traditional theory fails, if you want my opinion, and it's also where contemporary neuroscience seems to be coming up short. It doesn't have, unless you've attended my lectures, it doesn't have good accountings for the extraordinary states of consciousness that come up. I've offered you kind of rules for distinguishing chakra activity, assuming you had real-time brain imaging. And I need to emphasize that there are many exceptions to the rules. None of these processes happen with only the two limbic structures being active. All of them involve lots of the other parts of the brain. There are some, in fact, probably all of them involve all of the brain. Some of them in activation, some of them in inhibition, some of them immediately involved, some of them very distantly involved. But we're talking about a whole system here, which I'm reducing down to very simple parts to make this Kundalini chakra model comprehensible. And that leaves a lot out, which is unfortunate. What I've shown you is only the dominant structures, the structures that drive the experience and lend it its color, its fragrance, its shape, its harmonies, or what have you, not the whole picture. So if I get this published and other researchers decide to pick up and look into it further, you may find that the model that I've presented here will look very different after other heads have gotten into it and made their amendments and their adjustments and so forth. The first statement of a model in the history of science is almost never the ones that scientists end up working with and that ends up getting taught in the classroom years later. In turn, the Kundalini system itself is a great deal more complicated than I've been discussing. In addition to the 7 chakras, there are 3 central channels that run through the body: the Pingala, the Sushumna, and the Ida. And the Ida is actually passive in the traditions, passive, lunar, and mental. The Pingala is active, solar, and physical. Now, the Sushumna, the other one, is kind of neutral and exists as a kind of central post, if you like, around which these other energies can move and be sort of stabilized. 2 characters of the Ida and Pingala. Ida, by the way, means comfort, and Pingala means tawny, the color referring to the color of the sun. Especially when it's low down on the horizon, you can actually look at it comfortably. What I'm getting is that the Pingala is left hemispheric. It's concerned with arousal, it's concerned with activity, whereas the Ida is much more passive, much less physical, much more introspective. And that seems to implicate the right hemisphere as its primary support. And the idea in a drawing like this, where you see that the chakras are actually each one quite close to these channels on the left and the right of the illustration, says that each chakra is involved in both sides of the brain. So if the concept in this illustration is valid, then each chakra does indeed involve both sides of the brain, even though the dominant limbic structures that inform the chakras with their content, so to speak, may be one side of the brain or the other. Some of you need me to repeat that? Okay. Even though the illustrations that I showed you pointed to 2 limbic structures on the left or 2 limbic structures on the right, all the way through except for the crown chakra, the traditions that come from this more complicated illustration of the whole Kundalini system seem to imply that both sides of the brain are involved in all of the processes. Now, it may be that one side is being activated and the other side is being inhibited, both of which are brain activities. To deactivate is an activity in the brain. This leaves the final picture, the probable final picture, a great deal more complicated. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this is that I don't want anyone to see the finished video and think that I'm offering this as a new kind of scientific truth or a new set of correspondences. Not only are there animals and elements and gods and colors and numbers of flower petals that belong in each chakra, but then I step in and throw limbic structures on there as well. That's not my intention here. It is to take this long-standing intellectual tradition, which may be one of the most successful theories ever postulated in the history of the world, and try and put it on a neurological basis. The last thing to say about our first illustration, shown here again, is that in some traditions the chakras run through the body. Now, one of my first experiences working with chakras had to do with a time that I was at a spiritual retreat center, and there was someone who was leading a workshop in the heart chakra. And what they told us was that we should walk around the room in circles and put our attention, breathe into the heart chakra so that it actually expanded a bit when we inhaled and contracted a bit when we exhaled. And then we were to go in the outer circle, looking at people in the inner circle, making full-on eye contact while we did this exercise. We were told to keep it for 2 breaths and then move on to the next person. And what I found was that the deeper I went into this exercise, the more I found that the person in front of me was utterly and absolutely lovable. Whoever developed this exercise was clever. They didn't give us time to habituate to any given person. We didn't get a chance to get used to them. If they were ugly, well, we only saw them for 2 breaths. If they were gorgeous, we only saw them for 2 breaths. But what we were doing with this visualization and this breathing exercise continued solidly throughout. And by the time it was done, everybody loved everybody, just like Jesus said. But the interesting thing is, before we did that exercise, they had us each work with just 3 people. I forget how the blocking was set up, but each person found themselves looking at 3 people in the eyes while simply being aware of the surface. And nothing happened. Chakras run through the body. Now, this is a personal experience, and as such is not, strictly speaking, a bit of scientific evidence. But the experience was so powerful and so overwhelming that for me to talk about the chakras without bringing it in, without sharing that with you, would be abandoning a bit of important information. So, there it is, Kundalini and the chakras. Subtle bodies. And subtle bodies are a little bit hard to talk about because very few people have experienced them directly. Or rather, very few people have experienced them in ways that they can actually be sure are the activity of a subtle body. And we're going to take subtle bodies. Our starting position is that subtle bodies are experiences of our bodies that occur when we're in altered states of consciousness. So traditionally there are a number of subtle bodies, and my starting point is that we're not going to experience ourselves as any one of these while we're in normal states of consciousness. These can come up during things that have been given names like out-of-body experiences, astral travel, dream. We just saw 7 sets of structures, or in one case single structure, that together allow us to assemble a model of the chakras. But unless and until we have reason to believe that these body experiences number 7, we're not going to really bother about that too much. And right now, we don't really have that. What we do have are maps of the brain, maps of the body in the brain. This is the best known one. It's called the Penfield diagram, and it's based on the work of Wilder Penfield. In fact, I believe he sketched out the first one himself. He worked this out over the 1940s and into the 1950s. And it shows how the body is represented in the brain. And I'm talking about the body at the level of conscious perception and conscious control. So if I say I'm going to touch the edge of the podium with my finger and I move my arm and my finger forward to do it, That's conscious control. If I have an ant crawling on my ankle and I reach down and discover there's an ant and brush it away, that's a conscious perception from my body, one that comes within the realm of normal states of consciousness. And I would suggest that in the subtle body model, this is the representation of the body. This is the subjective experience of the body that would correspond to the physical body. And all of these are based on subjective experience. Our physical bodies can be physical bodies even when we're dead. And presumably, on some level, we're not going to experience them then. I'm talking about actual death, not near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences or something like that. Here is another map of the body in the nervous system. This one is actually very high up along the spine at the level of the cervical vertebrae number 1, the vertebrae that is just below the skull. And at this level, when there is stimulation of the spine, different areas in the body respond. This is almost as physical as the one we just saw, almost as closely related to our conscious control of our bodies. Of course, if you have anything happening here that is unexpected or pathological or injury related, you're going to find changes in your perception of your body that you won't have any control over. But there are not very many maps of the body known in the brain, although there is one researcher, Gerald Edelman, who feels that there could be quite a large number of them, most of which are awaiting discovery. There's another one of them in the cerebellum, and that's the word cerebellum means little brain, and that's the extra growth at the back of the brain, which, as you can see from the diagram, is structured quite differently. The tissue breaks down differently than it does in the rest of the brain. And in the cerebellum, here is the 2 maps of the body. Here we have the same phenomena again in the Penfield diagram. More representation is given to our faces and our hands than any other part of the body. So that we have a great deal of fine control over our fingers, conscious control. And we have a lot of control over our faces. We can wiggle our eyebrows and stretch our lips and so forth to give another level to the kind of communication that happens with gestures. And my own personal conjecture about this is that this is something we inherited from our primate ancestors. They have an extensive ability to communicate with facial expressions and with gesture. In fact, chimpanzees have been taught to speak in sign language. They've even insulted their keepers and asked for more candy and refused to eat foods they didn't like and so forth. They really took it on board and used it to communicate many more things than they were taught when they were taught sign language, assembling crude sentences originally. And I think it's because they have a huge amount of their brain given over to their hands, and with this they're able to communicate far more than they would be able to communicate otherwise. And of course, all primate species use facial expressions, grimaces, smiles, and so forth in order to communicate themselves. There's a rule of thumb that you never smile at a gorilla, because a gorilla will take that same facial expression and interpret it differently as an expression of aggressiveness. The hippocampus misfires in 2 experiences. One of them is dizziness, when we spin around enough that we actually lose our orientation in space. And the other is vertigo, where you stand at the edge, say, of a building or a cliff, and you look down, and the sudden falling away, the sudden expansion of your personal visual space is so dramatic that you can lose your orientation and become dizzy, and of course have to step back from the edge of the cliff. What I think is going on with qi, this kind of qi, is that the same stuff that happens in vertigo and dizziness is also happening in the personal first-hand experience of qi, except that instead of disturbing balance, it enhances it. And there is one brain researcher, he's actually a popular author, Dr. Oliver Sacks, who published a book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And in there he offers the hypothesis that for every deficit in brain activity, there's a corresponding surfeit. for every circumstance in which something doesn't have enough brain going on with it, there's another circumstance where there's too much. Now, I think that's a brilliant hypothesis, partly because of its absolute symmetry. It seems to echo the symmetry of the brain's organization and construction. And it does allow for chi to enhance balance in the way that other things disturb it. My own opinion is that for every spiritual state, there is a corresponding symptom of a psychiatric disorder. Something you can have going so well for you that you feel spiritually motivated, informed, and alive with it. There's another state of consciousness in which that thing is completely absent and causing a corresponding pain. The acquisition of spirituality involves some amount of pleasure. Even though the experiences can be uncomfortable, our self-esteem is still boosted when we feel these things. I've heard psychics tell me that they wish they could shut their abilities down a little more. They wish it had a rheostat for low, medium, and high, and they could just do high when they were doing psychic readings and turn it on medium for most of the time, and low when they were with people they didn't like. But there is no such switch. The experience of balance, the lack of balance, which involves maintaining our position in space, or maintaining our perception of our position in space, relies on two important areas of the brain. One of them is the hippocampus on the right side, and the other is an area which has the cumbersome name of occipitotemporoparietal region. And that's the area on the surface of the brain where the occipital lobes at the back of your head, the parietal lobes kind of at the surface and coming down to the side, and the temporal lobes, the true side of your brain, all come together. And I remember seeing an older neuroscience textbook where the author was saying that no one knew what happened in this area of the brain. It was an utter mystery. Now it's not so mysterious any longer, but it took a long time, much longer than for other areas of the brain, for its functions to become obvious. And one of its functions appears to be further contributions to our ability to orient ourselves in space. And when you're doing something like Tai Chi, with its strong, very heavy emphasis on posture, you're encouraged to keep yourself oriented in space while you're doing something in particular with your body. To walk normally while keeping your attention on the hara, that spot 3 fingers length below, 3 fingers width below the navel, as you just do something simple and ordinary like walking, can be a bigger challenge than you might think, and it takes a certain amount of training to achieve it. So that is my very brief segment on Qi. It relates to our body's ability to orient it in space, and doing Tai Chi successfully involves getting an extra measure of that which is ordinarily used to keep ourselves balanced. So when people say Tai Chi gives you balance, they're actually not using a metaphor. They're giving you something that is as literal and close to the truth as they can get. And like anything else from the Taoist tradition, if you can say it in words, it isn't quite it. Again, the Tao that can be spoken is not the real Tao, which encourages me to just stop talking. So the final segment for tonight, and then I'll take some questions, is yoga. Now I was developing some data on yoga, but it wasn't clean enough for me to start drawing conclusions. So I'm not going to do too much of that. I was going to tell you which altered state experiences are most common for people who do yoga and which brain parts that implicates. But instead we're just going to look at the simple experience of yoga practice, putting your body in an asana, keeping it there, moving to another asana, and then coming out again. And it's actually much simpler than I've just made it sound. Yoga puts your body into a state of arousal. You're going to take a posture like the one you're seeing now, and you're going to hold it for as long as the yoga instructor says, which can be a few seconds or a couple of minutes, not very long, and then you move to another posture. Now, ordinarily, if you find in the course of your daily movements, your ordinary movements, that you take on a posture as convoluted as some of the yoga postures, it's because you're trying to do something. Or maybe you fall down, slipping on the kitchen, and you rapidly lean back to catch your fall. The next thing to do is right yourself. If you're stretching like this, your body is tense and you lie down and you give your back a good stretch that way. The next thing to do is stand up and limber up something else. You don't hold the posture. The more unusual the posture, the less likely it is that you'll actually want to hold it for any length of time. It's not a relaxed state of consciousness, being in yoga, the one that comes to you while you're in a yoga asana. And I've talked to yoga practitioners who said they could barely get through some of the classes sometime. Asana after asana, sweat is pouring off their bodies. All they can do is wait for the door to open and the room that's filled with 20 sweating people finally to be open and the air to come in, and they're done. Yoga is a grueling spiritual practice. So you get into a state of arousal, but you don't act it out. And what that means is that certain areas on the left side of the brain, the side of the brain where arousal and excitement, words, and activity seem to be sort of housed, so to speak, gets activated, but there isn't any outlet for those energies. And I'm talking about literal actual neural activation. Your caudate nucleus, the one that's more active on the left when we are active, is going to be given a big job to do just getting in and holding the posture. But its natural inclination will be to move to some other physical posture, to some other activity, like getting up off the floor, if you've gotten into a weird posture so that you can break your fall. But that outlet is not allowed. So where does the activity go? It spills into another structure. Each time you go into a yoga asana, each asana activates an area of your brain that's accustomed to activity and then tells it to stop. It's kind of like the classical hurry up and wait spiritual practice. And over time, that activity will worm its way out into other structures, forging new pathways, dropping out synapses that would ordinarily inhibit activity in that direction. And when it comes to the left caudate nucleus, which you have in your handouts, and the left amygdala, downhill is to the amygdala. The amygdala has lower thresholds. It fires off more easily than the caudate nucleus does. So as you give it this job to do that gets it, clanging away in its activity, and then don't give it an outlet and force it to find new outlets for that activity, the most likely place for it to go is in the more sensitive structure, kind of downhill in neurological terms. And that's into that left amygdala, the one that's specialized for things like joy and bliss and happiness. So that over time, doing this regularly, you forge those new pathways and you find that you are much more likely to experience happiness in other moments because you have these new pathways that have been forged, burned into place through this rather grueling process. That's why it has to be grueling. It's not trying to shut down areas of the brain that lead to unhappiness, like the amygdala on the right might. It's trying to activate areas of the brain that lead to happiness and joy. The other thing is that when a solid yoga session is done, the right hemisphere of the brain, which has been quiet while the person puts themselves through these grueling exercises, is now free to reactivate itself. And because of the involvement of the amygdala on the left with its happiness specializations, the amygdala on the right isn't going to pick up too much, because the amygdala, the amygdala system itself, the two amygdala with the structure connecting them, is already active. It's got a very much better chance of finding of other areas on the right side being active when the yoga session is finished. And one of the first ones that's going to involve is the hippocampus on the right and the caudate nucleus on the right. The counterpart to the one that's being heavily tasked during yoga can burst into activity. Its specialization is relaxation. And so the person can find themselves feeling that with time their yoga practice has made them more balanced and more centered. And this seems to be the way yoga works, as near as I can tell.